Hello, everyone. I would like to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night to all the viewers from across the world who's joining us tonight. Welcome all to the Public Outreach Campaign Series. My name is Mirta Brown, and I'm the Project Director for the Airport Terminal Reconstruction Project. It's also known as Package 2. This session is being recorded, and the link to our YouTube channel will be available on our Facebook site later on. Those of you who are on Facebook can also go ahead and view along with us. The objective of the series is to engage you as a stakeholder. We have been presenting to the staff of the airport, to the airlines and the handlers, to the government of St. Martin, for its offices and many other community centers. Now we are extending this outreach to the general public so that we can also bring you up to speed with what's going on with the project. This way we can provide you with updates, progress on the project, and provide context and background on what's happening. We'll highlight some of the improvements, and you, as the general public, we expect you to become our ambassadors on this project. To this topic, we'll be discussing the funding around the project. At the end, we'll ask that you will be able to share your ideas with us, post your questions, any concerns. As I mentioned before, this is a stakeholder engagement, and your feedback is very much welcome. Just to get it out there, the series will be done on a monthly basis, but our next meeting is going to be 2 weeks from today, May 6, 2021. Please book it in your calendar. That particular meeting, we also want to go over the timelines, some of the milestones, and the challenges that we as the airport faced as we were executing the project. This will probably answer some of the questions on why it took so long for the project to move forward. We'll also be discussing the World Bank requirements and procedures, the bidding process, some of the equipment packages, and also why it's important for the environmental, social safeguards in the project. But before we jump into the funding, let me give you an overview on some of the pre-works that has been happening at the airport. The first one was the sprinkler system. After the hurricane, the sprinkler system was actually compromised, and before we started working in Package 1, which is our temporary facility, we had to re-engage in that location. The remainder of the terminal was not sprinkler protected. We have now carried out that project. We signed on with a local contractor, Pro Engineering Installers. This was done in November 2020. And they are just about complete with a reinstating of the sprinkler system, the fire sprinkler system, in the non-operational portion of the terminal. We are also working on the more remediation and waste disposal. That was the second large project that was carried out. We signed this contract in October 2020. The contractor started in November. It was scheduled for 150 days, so by the end of April, but they're finished. They completed it at the end of March. This particular contractor, AAR Incorporated, although they were an international firm, they worked with some of the local contractors here on the island, which was Tidal Wave, our Caribbean NV, and Caribbean General Contractors. The more remediation was very important because we had quite a bit of areas in the terminal that was not approachable. We needed to remove all of the mold-infected sheetrock, the drywall. A lot of the metals were corroded, and we had spores throughout the building. AAR, along with Tidal Wave, they demolished most of the locations, and we will be inviting the public down for tours eventually, and you will be able to see how clean the terminal is at this point. While AAR and the local contractors carried out the mold remediation, we also had a company by the name of Farmers. They were the environmental consultants, who needed to test the area and make sure that it was clear of mold. This was an independent consultant that was checking the contractor to ensure that at the end of the project, that the airport was mold-free, that the mold was reduced to acceptable levels. During that, we found a lot of stacking, E. coli, black mold, white mold, and a lot of hazardous stuff within the terminal that needed to be removed. We are very happy at this point to say that the airport is now clean. Over to the funding. Let me explain a little bit how the funding is put together at the airport. Do you remember right after the hurricane, the government of the Netherlands, they pledged to St. Martin $553 million. It was given to the island of St. Martin as a grant, aid, a gift. Depends on what website you look at it. It gives you that it was issued to the St. Martin government. But before the St. Martin government could take on that grant, the St. Martin Recovery, Reconstruction, Resiliency Trust Fund was put together. This was done back in April 16, 2018. It was a joint venture between the government of the Netherlands, the government of St. Martin, managed by the World Bank. The monies that was offered to the St. Martin government is being used for projects, recovery projects on the island. These projects are being executed by the National Recovery Program Bureau, the NRPB, which is headed by Mr. Clary Connor. If you want a little bit more information about this particular trust fund and how it's set up, you can visit the NRPB website, it's at the bottom, or you can also go to the stmartinrecovery.org website. Now, you may be asking, what does the recovery fund, the trust fund, has to do with the airport? Well, in 2018, the airport went into arbitration with insurance agency. This arbitration continued into 2019, and it was evident that even with the release of the insurance funds, the money will not be coming to the airport, but be going to the bondholders, because the airport had a 2012 loan indenture where they took out monies to do projects at the airport, and the bondholders were the first in line to be paid from the insurance proceeds. We also needed to ensure that the bondholders had confidence that the money that we were going to be receiving from insurance would be able to rebuild the airport. The airport at that point had no other choice, but we reached out to the government of St. Martin for assistance. What I just showed you here was the World Bank procedures, and we'll give a little bit more in depth on how the World Bank played a role and how the money is going to be used later on. So when we reached out to the St. Martin government, we had the government, they went to the trust fund and they were able to get $72 million in grants for the airport. This came from the government of the Netherlands to the trust fund to the government of St. Martin. While that was happening as well, the European Investment Bank also indicated that they can assist with the project, and they offered a loan of $50 million to the government of St. Martin. The government of St. Martin put these two fundings together, and in an on-lending agreement, they offered it to the Princess Juliana International Airport. So $122 million, that's a 50 from the European Investment Bank, the 72 million from the trust fund via the government of the Netherlands was presented to the airport for the project. This is being done and implemented by the National Recovery Program Bureau, very similar to what was explained and how the trust fund functions. The airport now also needed to inject some money of their own. $7 million was actually added to the pot, which made it $129 million. Because this is part of the government of the Netherlands Trust Fund, the St. Martin Recovery and Reconstruction Resiliency Trust Fund, that's part of the trust fund, it's going to be managed by the World Bank. And because the World Bank is so involved, the European Investment Bank allowed that their rules and regulations also be governed by what is being done by the World Bank. And that's one of the reasons confusion comes about World Bank funding, but the World Bank is actually the one managing all of these funds from these different entities that came to the airport. So the 129 that we discussed is now broken down into 4 components. Component 1, which is one of the most important, is for the reconstruction of the terminal building facility. It's only for the construction. It cannot be used for anything else, only the construction. Here is where it's broken down by the World Bank that put in 50 million, the EIB that put in 50 million, and the 7 million from the airport, which made up the $107 million funding that we've been discussing for quite a while now. So component 1, as I mentioned, is only for the construction. We're going to be doing package 2. We also have 7 equipment packages: the passenger boarding bridge, the baggage handling system, the security screening machines. So all of the machines are on the way out, as well as those in the basement. We'll be introducing self-service backdrops, some large digital signage, so video walls, flight information displays, full bag seating, as well as some various fixtures, furniture, and appliances, like fatigue mats, the garbage bins that needs to be purchased. All of this comes out of that 107. So as we mentioned again, that is component 1, only for reconstruction. The other components was component 2, which is used for capacity building and project management. This is where the World Bank wanted to ensure that we had certain specialties on the project. Here is, for example, the environmental social safeguard person. They're being paid out of this component. We also need to ensure at the end that we audit all the funds and how it's being utilized. So the auditor is also being paid out of these funds. So component 2 is specifically designated for capacity building, as well as those project management elements that are required. Component 3 now, as I mentioned, NRPB is the one that's overlooking what's going on the project. They're also managing how the funds are spent. They also needed the opportunity to have capacity building as well. If they needed any kind of consultants that came in to assist them, they would also need to be able to pay for these consultants. So $500,000 was also allocated for that. So 107 for the construction, 500,000 for component 2, which for airports capacity building, 500,000 for the NRPB capacity building, and then a very important component, component 4. The World Bank realized that after the hurricane, the airport was still in a very vulnerable situation. They wanted to ensure that we had capacity to be able to pay staff, pay utilities. So they gave us $21 million for liquidity support. This liquidity support is something that came in very handy, especially in 2020, when COVID-19 hit. When COVID-19 hit, the airport was shut down for 3 months. There was no aircraft coming to the airport. There was no passengers, there was no business. And the airport quickly used up a lot of its capacity, a lot of its monies. And this component was the savior for the airport to be able to pay salaries as well as utilities. As I mentioned, $21 million was made available. The airport has already tapped into $7 million of that to be able to pay its salaries and utilities. Now, I want you to remember, we spoke about $129 million, which was made up of component 1, 2, 3, and 4. But if you have been listening to the airport's issues, there's always a confusion about some additional monies that was needed. So the 107, as I mentioned, World Bank, 50 million, EIB, 50 million, airport, 7 million, which made up that 107 million. But I just mentioned, we did some pre-works. Pre-works outside of component 1 was the sprinkler system, mold remediation, the demolition and waste disposal. All of that came out of the airport's monies. This is some of the monies that was released from the bondholders after we won the arbitration. I would like you all to join us again on the 6th, where I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on the milestones and challenges, and I'll dive in a little bit more on the arbitration case so that you can see where that money was spent. We also needed to pay the designer for the project. We had third-party support. There's some lawyers that were involved to assist with what needs to happen. And the supervising engineer is also going to be an important aspect during the construction. We took out a construction or risk insurance. This was an insurance that ensured that while construction was on its way, should there be any issues, the airport would have been able to cover any damages, any liabilities. And we did not want to pass this on to the contractors, since we had multiple projects needed to be executed. We mentioned that the construction all risk actually came into play from the time in 2017 when we needed to do repairs to the tower, to the roof of the airport, to the fencing of the airport, other facilities. So it has been in existence since then, and it's going to carry on over to the end of this particular project. Another important cost is the PMU. The PMU stands for the Project Management Unit. That's my team, along with a couple of consultants that work on the project to ensure that it is carried out the correct way. Of there, we were able to get $24 million out of the trust fund. The bondholders allowed us to get $24 million out of the insurance proceeds, but to put a budget together to be able to cover these costs. Now that we're clear on how the funding is and how it's being used, I'll dive into a little bit on the project status and give you a little bit more on where we are. We sent out the bids back in October 2020. We received them back on the 23rd of March. When those bids came back, we are now in the process of evaluating those bids, where we'll be able to award the contract hopefully in July. Based on the discussions we will have with those projects, with the contractor, we'll see if this timeline, the 23rd of March, if that's going to change at that point. Construction should take about 22 months to execute, but we're not quite sure on the mobilization time each contractor is required. As we reviewed the evaluation, we found out that some of them had different times indicated for their mobilization time. So once we are aware of who is going to be awarded, we'll be able to have that discussion. So where are we in the evaluation? As I mentioned, the 23rd of March, we received the bids. We are now providing the evaluation. The bids report will be completed by the 17th of May. When, at that point, we will be able to send that document and let everyone know who we expect would be the person who will be awarded. Actually, let me take a step back. By the 17th of May, this needs to go to the World Bank. The World Bank needs to first review that process to ensure that the report was very objectively written. They want to make sure that we're clear on why we're choosing a particular contractor. It needs to be very clearly written out in that evaluation report. And only at that point can we indicate who we intend to award the contract to, which will be by the 16th of June. At that point, we will have something called a standstill period. That is 10 days where any one of the bidders who did not win the contract or who is not the one we're looking at awarding, they will have the opportunity to make a complaint, any objection on the process for us to resolve. We must resolve that before we can award the contract. Once we're past that standstill period, we will be able to award, and hopefully by the end of July, we will be awarding the contract to a contractor and we start the project. Just to give a quick recap, we received 4 bids. One from China Civil Engineering Construction Corporation, Chinese, Ballast Nadam Projects, which is a Dutch company, Cotton International, American company, and Acorn. If you go on our website, this information is public knowledge. This is one of the things working with the World Bank. Everything is extremely transparent and everyone is updated along the way, what's happening and what should be happening at that point. As I mentioned before, by July 27th, we are expecting to award the contract. This here is just some of the steps that we need to take along the way. I mentioned the World Bank a couple of times. So what is their involvement really? I brought this slide up a bit earlier, and I told you we would jump in a bit more to explain it. The World Bank, their role is an ex-ante review. I myself didn't know what a word meant until I looked it up. But basically, before we do anything, we need to get their approval. Every step of the way, they are making sure that we are very transparent, we're very diligent, we do what is required, and there's a very, very structured way of how they expect things to happen. So some of the safeguards they put in place is they ensure that we had a project team, which is a project management unit I mentioned earlier. This is the structure of the organogram of the project management unit. Myself as the project director, we have environmental social safeguards person, a financial controller, a project manager, procurement officer, coordinators, and project assistants. All of this here, we're also working with a project team where we keep them abreast on any changes in design or whatever. And we also have a communication officer working with us who normally gets all the information out to the public on what we are doing. As you can see, the NRPB is right along with us through this whole journey. We also have the designers, the supervising engineer that's coming on board. And at this point, we're waiting for the contractor to join the team. Within the World Bank, we need to do procurement development strategy. This is a document that actually outlines exactly how things need to be put together. I mentioned before the project, package 2, and the 7 equipment packages. Each one of these projects need to go through this long sequence of work. We need to ensure that this is followed for each one of these steps. And that's one of the reasons I mentioned before, it takes a bit longer than working on a private bid. The World Bank is a very, very rigid in the way they expect us to execute, and it has its benefits. The World Bank also ensures that adequate fiduciary controls are used on the project to ensure that the funds in place go where they need to go. That's where the financial management happens. The NRPB themselves, so the money from the government of St. Martin, sorry, from the Netherlands, went to the World Bank. The EIB also kicked in some money, as well as St. Martin, the PJIAE airport. We also needed to include the 7 million. And all of this money went to a bank account that is held by the NRPB. This is component 1, 2, and 3. So every time we go and we do anything with any of the contractors and something needs to be paid, the NRPB is the one who does the payment. The airport sends in and explains that we are in agreement that this payment can be made. The NRPB does their due diligence, and then they pay the vendors, the contractors, the suppliers for the goods, works, or services that are carried out. It's not paid from the airport's account. The airport has none of this money. The only thing that the airport does get at times is, I mentioned, the component 4, liquidity support. And that is done in tranches. So it's not like the $21 million is sitting on the airport account. The airport needs to actually prove to the World Bank that we have a financial issue. We show them our debt service ratio. We show them our books. They review it, and only at that point do we get money directly on our account from the World Bank for component 4. So as I review that again, the NRPB holds all the funds. It's not at the airport. It's done in tranches. And the NRPB is the one that does the payments on behalf of the airport. And at the end of all of this, it needs to be audited. That's where, again, component 2 comes in, where we can pay an auditor to come in and ensure that the monies that was allocated to us goes where it needed to go. There's other social safeguards also in place. Everyone wanted to know, why do you need an environmental specialist on board? But there's actually 10 components that the World Bank looks at that is very important during construction. Any kind of project, they want to ensure that we take these things into consideration. Stuff like labor working conditions, the community health and safety, the financial intermediaries, stakeholder engagement. This is what we're doing today. We need to make sure that all of these things are taken into consideration. Of these components, of these 10 components, 6 of them apply to this particular project. And there's where we are reviewing and ensuring that this happens. We even kicked in the COVID-19 safeguards to ensure that we also took that into consideration. So a quick summary. The project is funded through the loans of the government of St. Martin. The reconstruction, the estimate is going to be around $131 million. I explained to you the 107 plus the 24 million that we received from the bondholders. And we still have the bid packages to be done. So the 107, we have the construction that needs to be done, package 2, plus the equipment packages that still need to be done. I'm hoping that this session was enlightening. It brought more clarity to what the airport is doing. You understand now how the funding is being used and what we're going to be doing with that fund. And we will invite you guys to join us again. We will be able to walk you through some more aspects of the project so that you're also informed as we move forward. We will be soon opening the mic so we can have some questions from the viewers. If I can answer them right now, I will. If I cannot, we will be taking notes of those, get those answers for you, and then we will be quickly responding as we go. I can see one hand being raised already. Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Bejani.
Good evening, Mr. Mitro. Excellent presentation. I watched it before also. My question is, we are planning and focusing to reopen airport by 2023.
Correct.
Have you taken in consideration all aspects that we cannot do it before that? Have you exhausted all the ideas that cannot help to open it by 2022 in mid or by end of 2022?
There's where we are at this point. We are waiting for the contractor to come on board, because we can make plans, but if the contractor cannot abide by those plans, it won't happen. So once we are finished with the evaluation and we have already been able to award the contract to a contractor, those are some of the conversations we'll be opening with them to figure out what they can do in their schedule to speed up the works. Hopefully we'll be able to win some time as we go forward.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I don't know if there's any more questions, any concerns, any comments. I know some folks were also looking on Facebook. I don't know if the person who's monitoring on Facebook. I'm looking at my team to the side here. As mentioned, the recording will be put on our link, will be put on our Facebook. So if you did not understand everything that was explained tonight, you will have the opportunity to take your time and listen to the recording. And if there are questions that come up at that point, please do not be afraid to send them. We have our social media platform is always available, so you can make your comments there. We will also be using our website, sxmairport.com. This is a platform we use for all our bidders. So if you also visit that site, you will be able to see our projects in place, giving a highlight on what needs to be done and how we're going to be executing it. And there's also something called the GRM. It's under the complaints section of the website, the airport website. The GRM is one of those very important aspects for all of those who may have, again, questions, concerns, objections, even comments. It could be some positive comments as well. You can log on to our web page, sxmairport.com, under the construction tab. Go to the complaints and go to the GRM. There's various ways of you being able to communicate with us. You can send it via email, you can download the document. You can also use the web form and submit your complaint, objection, concerns, and within 14 days, we will get back to you with how we're going to be able to address those situations. There's also a Dropbox at the airport where you can do it in the departure hall. Again, download a document, write it out. Even our passengers have the opportunity to be able to use that platform. I'm hoping that this was very, very clear. And just to remind you, I mentioned May 6th, mark it in your calendar. We'll be discussing the timeline and the challenges for the milestones that we went through. This would be a topic I would really want you guys to be able to sit in on, as it really explains why it took so long to get to where we are right now in the project. I open the floor again to see if there's anyone that has a question or a comment. If you don't want to use your, Mr. Beljani, your hand is still up. Do you still have another question?
Oh, no, I need to raise it down.
Okay, great.
Thanks,
great.
thanks.
I see a lot of good people on the call. I really appreciate you all taking the time this evening to come online with us to listen to what we have to present. And we expect to see you online on the 6th as well. Thank you very much.